guys, and welcome back to another Mystery Monday video on my channel. Today's video is a very interesting one, and it is definitely one that is following the theme of super strange disappearances, cases, kinds of things that I've been covering lately on this channel. So I really think that you guys are going to enjoy this one. But also quickly, I just want to mention that if I sound a little bit nasally or kind of off, it is because I do have a very bad cold. But I still wanted to make sure that I can get out a video for you guys this week, so I hope that that doesn't bother you too much throughout this case. But with that all being said, let's get right into it. Now, if you're really into unsolved mysteries and just strange things in general, then you've probably noticed that most cases do take on their own kind of case name. But this case in particular doesn't have a very specific case name, but it is very well known as America's own Dyatlov Pass incident. And if you don't know what Dyatlov Pass is, then I highly recommend that you look that case up because it is also very strange. Now, I have done a little bit of research on this in particular case of my own in the past, but I never really dove into it like I have this time. And as soon as I started getting really into this case, I was immediately hooked because of all of the bizarre circumstances that just go on continuously throughout this case. Now, this case all began on February 24th, 1978, when 5 men, who I will most likely be referring to as the boys throughout this case, because that is what they were known to by their loved ones and people that knew them in the community, all headed out from Yuba County, California to Chico to watch a college basketball game. Now, I'm going to go through one by one and tell you the names of all of these 5 men as well as a little bit about them, but I do just want to mention that all of these men were considered to be somewhat special needs. Now, they were extremely high functioning and very independent, but they were still considered to have some issues in that area. Now, the first man from this group that I'm going to talk about is Theodore Weir, and at this time he was 34 years old, but actually had the brain of a child, and he was known to be extremely just overly naturally friendly. Jackie Hewitt was 24 years old and was extremely awkward in social situations, and he would find that when he was in social situations he couldn't speak clearly. But when he was with people that he was comfortable with, such as his friends or his loved ones, he was known to actually be very outgoing and could speak to them for hours, and he really loved his friends as well as his family. Jack Madruga was 30 years old and was actually enlisted in the army, but was discharged after they did a medical evaluation. Now, he wasn't ever diagnosed with anything, but he was considered by his peers to be extremely slow. But besides that, he still had his driver's license and was extremely passionate about his car, basketball, and his friends. William Sterling, also known as Bill Sterling, was 29 years old, but just like Theodore Weir, had the mind of a child. And he rarely left his house unless it was to go to church, basketball, or the program for mentally challenged adults, which all 5 of these men were a part of. And last but not least was 25-year-old Gary Mathias. Now, Gary was actually also enlisted in the army, but he was discharged for being very violent and was later diagnosed with schizophrenia. But when he went home, he was actually put on medication, and at this point he hadn't had a schizophrenic outbreak in quite a few years. Like I mentioned briefly, all 5 of these men were involved in a program for mentally challenged adults. And that is where they met, and that is how they became so close. But not only that, all of these 5 boys shared an immense love for basketball, which is why they were all going to drive for 45 minutes to an hour to Chico, California to watch a college basketball game. Through this program that they attended, all 5 of the boys actually played on a basketball team of their own. And on February 25th, the day after the college basketball game in Chico that they were driving to see, they would be participating in their own very important basketball game, as the winners of this game would win a day trip for all 5 of the teammates to go to LA. And the boys really wanted to win this, so this game was extremely important to them. In fact, this game was so important to them that their parents had all said that before leaving for the game in Chico, all of the boys laid out their uniforms for the next day and kind of got their stuff ready to go to the game the following day, which is the one that they would be participating in. And after they were finished setting all of their stuff up for the following day, Jack Madruga would go and pick up all 4 of his friends in his prized possession, which was his turquoise Mercury Montega. And I'm going to insert a photo of that car here because I am not a car person and I definitely butchered that name, but this somewhere is the exact kind of car that it was. The boys had gone to the basketball game in Chico, California, which was planned to have been finished at 10 p.m. So the families expected the boys home no later than 11:30. But when 11:30 came and went, all of the families became to grow extremely worried. Some of you watching this video might be thinking these were grown men. They could have very well have stopped at a bar or another friend's house or something like that on the way home. But for these 5 boys, that was extremely unlikely. Because of their mental state, none of them liked social situations, and it was very rare that any of them even went out. So for them to go to the basketball game, let alone go somewhere on the way home, was just extremely not in their character. Especially when they knew that the following day they had a big basketball game that was very important to them. It just wasn't like them to go out or stop on the way home, especially not without calling to let their parents know. So after the boys had never arrived home, all of their families kind of got into contact with one another and decided that it was in their best interest to phone the police. And the head chief of police in Yuba County at this time had actually gone to school with one of the boys and took this case very, very seriously. And so on February 25th, the police conducted a full search to find out where these boys were and to get all of the information that they could on their whereabouts. And that is when the police had found out that the boys had actually attended the basketball game, and there was confirmed sightings of the boys getting back into Jack Madruga's car, leaving the game once it was finished. And they were also able to confirm that the boys had actually stopped at a convenience store on the way home to buy snacks for the drive. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the boys bought at the convenience store, but I do know that it wasn't enough food to sustain them for a long time. It was just some chocolate bars and some pop or milk or whatever like that, just kind of like snack foods to get them from Chico to Yuba County. And that is all the police really could get on this case at this point, and they really didn't have any idea where the boys were and couldn't have any more information to go on about their whereabouts. The road from Yuba County to Chico, California was pretty much just a straight drive. So this situation had investigators and everybody else who knew about the case extremely puzzled. The first clue on this case came on February 28th when the police had decided to search the mountains to see if there was any evidence of the boys up there. And that is where they found Jack Madruga's car. It was actually located 70 miles east of Chico, California, when to get home the boys would have had to have gone 50 miles south. And this was just something else in this case that extremely puzzled investigators, because the road that Jack's car was found on was an extremely secluded, dark, not lit up kind of road, and it is described to be in an area that you just couldn't accidentally turn onto it. And the road was extremely unkept, there was potholes all over it, and on the night when the boys vanished, it was snowing heavily. And so the question as to of why the boys would have even gone up this road to begin with was something that was sitting heavily on everybody's minds. Investigators in this case originally thought that, okay, maybe the boys did accidentally turn onto this road, and then they had to abandon the car because maybe it became stuck. But after further investigation, they found that the car was not stuck, and it actually had more than enough gas in it to get the boys home from that exact spot, and the engine was running just fine. The car keys were missing, but the police were able to hotwire the vehicle just to make sure that everything was running smoothly to try and figure out exactly why the boys had abandoned their vehicle exactly where it was. And inside the vehicle, they also found all of the boys' wrappers for the snacks that they'd eaten on the drive home, and 4 maps were inside of the glove compartment, but they were folded very neatly and didn't seem to have been touched. And one of these maps was a detailed map of California. Now, police had tried to conduct searches around the area in which the vehicle was found, but due to the extreme weather conditions, they had to call off the search after 2 of the searchers almost lost their lives due to the conditions of the weather. And those are professionals, so you can only imagine the hard time that these 5 boys would have had if they had gotten out of the vehicle, which at this point they didn't know if they had or what had happened to them. On June 4th, 1978, a group of motorcyclists came across a Forest Service trailer in the woods. And they said immediately after arriving here, they noticed a very foul odor that was kind of lingering in the air. And because this odor was so foul, they just assumed that an animal had died nearby and was now rotting. While searching the area, one of these men had noticed that a window inside the large trailer had actually been broken. And after further investigation, he found that the door to the trailer was actually unlocked. So he went inside and started to kind of look around. And that is when he had found at the back of the trailer on a bed underneath 6 blankets was the deceased body of Theodore Weir. When he was found, again, he was laying on a bed at the back of the trailer underneath 6 blankets, and he had extremely bad frostbite on both of his feet and his shoes were missing. But they had actually discovered a smaller pair of shoes in the trailer that were believed to have belonged to Gary Mathias. Theodore had also lost 80 pounds since the time that he had gone missing, suggesting to investigators that he could have possibly died from starvation. Investigators discovered that Theodore Weir was actually alive for 8 weeks after the day that the boys had gone missing. And it is also said that in those 8 weeks, Theodore had never tried to leave the bed. Now, I'm not sure how they know this, but it is a confirmed fact in this case. Investigators had also found empty packets of Army C rations around the floor kind of near the bed. So this suggested to them that in the time that Theodore was alive, this is what he was eating. But something very strange that investigators discovered in this case is that there was actually an unlocked cabinet inside of the trailer that was full of dehydrated meals. And I mean, like, there was tons and tons of meals inside this cabinet. It is said that there was actually enough to feed a small group of people for at least a year. And none of them had been touched at all. There was also tons of cardboard and paper and matches inside of this trailer that the boys could have used to have made a fire. But a fire was never made, and there was no evidence that they even ever tried to make one. And the propane tank at the back of the trailer that would have at least provided them with heat for a few weeks was never touched. So all of these little things that are put together now come up to be extremely strange. They had food, they never tried to make a fire, they never ate the food, and they never turned on the propane tank, which could have been a very strong source of survival for them, especially in these extremely cold conditions. And on June 5th, investigators discovered the body of Jack Madruga. He was found 11 miles away from the trailer and was believed to have been on his way back to the car, as the road that he was discovered on was the road that was leading back to his vehicle. This next part is a little bit graphic, and it's talking about Jack Madruga's body, so if you don't want to hear this, just kind of skip this part. But his body was severely decaying, and it seemed that animals had started to eat off of him. He was dragged 10 miles to a stream, and all of the flesh off of his right arm was pretty much completely missing. And he was found clutching onto his favorite watch very tightly, but both of his eyeballs had been removed or were eaten by an animal, and 2 of his fingers were just completely gone. On the other side of the road, investigators found a bunch of remains scattered everywhere. And after sending them in to be analyzed, they came back that this was in fact the remains of Bill Sterling. His remains had also been eaten by animals and were spread actually around the area of about 50 square feet. But parts of his clothing that he was last seen wearing on the day that he vanished were also found kind of near some of these remains, which just helped confirm that this was in fact the remains of Billy Sterling. When this news got back to the Yuba County, all of the residents were extremely devastated, but especially the families of these boys, understandably. And that is when Jack Hewitt Sr. decided that he was going to help this search for his son. And despite being told by investigators and police not to help, he insisted, and they were fairly confident at this point that his son was deceased, and they did not want him to be the one to find his remains, but he was really adamant that he wanted to do this, and he was doing it regardless of what they said. And sure enough, Jack Hewitt Sr. actually found a backbone as well as his son's jeans and the shoes that he was last seen wearing on the day that he vanished. And just days after this, investigators found Jack Hewitt's skull, which was confirmed to be him after comparing his dental records. Gary Mathias was the only one of these boys whose remains were not found, and police were concerned that if he had found some kind of way to survive out here, what his mental state would be like at this point without his medication. To this day, Gary Mathias has never been found, but due to the fact that his shoes were found inside of the trailer, police believe that he was in there at some point, and maybe he had traded shoes with Theodore, and that is why Theodore's shoes were missing and Gary's were in the trailer. Investigators speculated that maybe the boys had become lost, and maybe they turned on this road accidentally, and after realizing how badly it was snowing, they abandoned the vehicle to go and try and walk towards help. But to get to the trailer, they would have had to walk over 20 miles in the extremely bad weather conditions that they were having, as well as this area was very mountainy and difficult to walk through. You would think that after the boys had arrived at the trailer, they would be looking for a way to stay warm, and the first thing that you'd think of in this kind of situation would be to start a fire. But again, evidence proves that they did not do this. I mean, it is possible that they didn't know about the propane tank, or they didn't know how to work it, or something like that, but with 2 of these boys being in the army, they would have known basic survival skills for these types of things. People who are in the army are trained for these kinds of things. So you would have think that their first thing that they would want to do would be build a fire. And again, evidence did not show that they did this. It is also speculated in this case that maybe Hewitt, Sterling, and Madruga had actually left the trailer to go and look for help because of the bad state that Weir was in. His feet were so badly frostbitten that he possibly couldn't stand up, so you can just imagine what pain and the awful state that he was in. And maybe Mathias had actually stayed back to look after him. And because of the extreme weather conditions, the 3 boys had not made it back to the trailer after going to search for help, and maybe Gary Mathias had actually gone out to search for them. This theory is backed up because just outside of where the trailer was, they'd actually found 3 blankets and a rusted torch. So maybe Mathias had actually gone out to search for his friends and bring them back to the trailer, but had also died of exposure. And due to the fact that Gary Mathias' body has never been discovered, this theory is again just speculation. And it also doesn't explain why the boys had turned up that road to begin with. Again, this road wasn't one that you would accidentally turn onto, and it wasn't even a road that was on their way home. They were completely in the wrong direction. Jack Madruga's mother has come out now and said that she believes that someone or something had actually chased the boys up that mountain, but she doesn't know how something or someone could have gotten the upper hand on them like that. If all of that wasn't confusing enough, here is just a little bit more of confusing information that will make your brain rattle throughout this case. A man by the name of Joseph Shores had actually come forward to investigators and told them that on February 24th, he was actually driving down the same road that the boys had been driving down when his Volkswagen Beetle had broke down. And while he was trying to dig out his vehicle, he had actually suffered from a minor heart attack, which caused him to have to spend the night inside of his car. He said that around 2 a.m. he was awoken by a strange whistling, and when he looked out his window, he saw multiple men as well as a woman and a baby standing about 100 feet away from him in front of a vehicle, and the headlights were pointing at them, and that is how he could make out that there was a few men and a woman and a baby. He said that he had called out for help, but this seemed to kind of freak out the group of people, and they rushed back to their vehicle, got inside, and drove away. He said that he was awoken again later on that night to the same whistling sound, but this time he couldn't see where it was coming from. At around 5 a.m., Joseph Shore's car actually ran out of gas, and that was the only thing that was keeping him warm. So this kind of forced him to get out of his vehicle and walk down the road to try and find some help. He said that he had noticed the Mercury Montega, but at this time he didn't think anything of it. After this statement came out, several people had also come forward to investigators saying that they had seen the boys at a lodge nearby making a phone call, or several phone calls, but none of this information has been confirmed. Last year, a woman has actually posted on a forum about the boys saying that she is Jackie Hewitt's sister-in-law, and she said that her, as well as the other families of the other boys, believed that the boys had witnessed an altercation between another group of men and a woman that night. She then said that she believes that the 5 boys had actually confronted this group of men and tried to stop them from doing whatever they were doing to that woman. And this enraged these strangers, and then they, I guess, began fighting or something like that, and these strangers threw Gary Mathias off a bridge. And the other boys jumped into the car and drove up the mountain in fear to try and get away from these men. Again, this isn't confirmed, and if this was the case, then when did the boys stop at the convenience store? If they were having an altercation with a group of men outside the basketball game, and they drove straight up the mountain, then they wouldn't have had time to stop at the convenience store. So unless this altercation happened somewhere else or maybe outside of the convenience store, but the convenience store clerk never said anything about this. And you would think that if there was an altercation and a man was thrown off a bridge, that is something that you would notice. And also, if that is the case, then how did Gary Mathias' shoes end up in the trailer? I mean, you don't expect to get into a fight, and when you do get into a fight, I don't think that you would grab your friend's shoes. So that is just something that I am questioning throughout reading this theory. This case has so many theories in it that I could sit and talk about them for days on end. But those 2 are just the ones that I have come across more commonly online. But some of the other theories include alien abduction, the boys were being stalked by Sasquatch, things like that. But none of these theories that I've come across so far answer any of the questions that I have about this case, and some of them even just leave me with more questions. The obvious question that I have in this case is why the boys went up that mountain road to begin with. Why didn't they just drive home? Why were they going in the complete opposite direction of where they should have been headed? But another question that I have is, where is Gary Mathias? That is an obvious one too. But also, why did the boys abandon the vehicle when it had gas in it? And they could have sat in there for quite a while and remained warm, but they decided to get out of the vehicle and go and embrace the cold rather than just stay inside. Another question I have is if Joseph Shores was telling the truth, who was the woman and the baby, and where are they now? Like I said before, this is another case that just leaves you sitting there with your brain just running. You can't figure out, you can't even come to a conclusion as to what could have possibly happened that night to cause this such a strange occurrence of events. And like I said, there are so many theories in this case that I didn't talk about. But if you guys come across a theory that you believe personally or you think is very believable, please comment them down below so that the viewers of this video as well as myself can also read them, because this case is one that I just sit back about now and think about over and over again. What could have possibly happened that night? My heart sincerely goes out to all of these 5 boys as well as their loved ones. I mean, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it is a very rarity that these boys would have even gone out, and they were so excited for this basketball game, and they decided to go out of their comfort zone and go out to this basketball game, and it just ended in such bad fate. I can't even come to understand how this happened or what happened to lead them up that mountain, but I do know that this is such a tragic event. I really sincerely hope that at some point we can figure out what exactly happened, why the boys went up the mountain, why they weren't in the car, where Mathias is, what happened to all of them. But for some reason, because this case is so old and because of the extremely strange circumstances, I'm just not confident in this case that it will ever be closed. But guys, that brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any more videos from me. Also, I just wanted to ask if you guys wanted to see any other types of videos from me that aren't horror related. Can you let me know about that in the comments down below as well? But I definitely think that horror is my strong suit, but I just thought I'd ask because I have been getting suggestions to do other types of videos. But that is all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!